Hey guys, welcome to my channel. This is Bluefin Design and I'm Nikhil. And today we're going to be looking at the different input field animations and design, like the radio button design, the checkbox and how to animate the checkbox, and the toggle switches. We're also going to look at two different styles of buttons and the hover states, like so. Could be a submit button or any other button that you're designing. So one is a professional level button and the other one is a bit casual. We're also going to look at the text box design and the way Google designs it. So this is the hover state and the active in focus state. And I'm also going to show you two extra surprise design animations for radio button and checkbox. So do stick around till the end. So let's get started. I'm in Adobe XD and we are going to begin with creating radio buttons. So I have an artboard and to begin making the radio buttons, I'm going to make an ellipse quickly. I'm not worried about the size of the radio button just for the tutorial, but you can adjust the size according to your designs. So I have the ellipse. Just quickly going to just move it around over here. And for this ellipse we just need the border, and I'm going to set the border width to about 2, and I have some pre-selected colors in my palette, so I'm just going to quickly choose one color. Next we're going to duplicate this ellipse by using the shortcut Command or Control D, and for this ellipse we're going to deselect the border and select a fill of the same color, but again I'm going to resize the ellipse. Now I use the shortcut Alt and Shift to actually resize the ellipse about its center. You can try it out as well. So that's all we need for the radio button. Now I'm going to create a component for these two ellipses, and I can do that in the properties inspector by pressing the plus icon over here. So we've created a default state. For the component, I'm going to name it as radio button, and again I cannot stress this enough, naming your layers is extremely important. So this default state, I want it to be the unselected state, if you know what I mean. So we are going to hide this inner ellipse, but instead of just directly hiding it from the layers panel, I'm going to set the opacity to 0 so it's invisible. Selecting the component, I'm going to create one more state, and over here in the latest update for Adobe XD, you see that they've added the ability to create a toggle state, which is perfect for a radio button. So I'm going to rename it to selected, and in this state the only change I'm going to make it is set the opacity of this inner ellipse to 100% to mark it as selected. So if you noticed, when I was creating a component, hover states and toggle states have this flash or lightning icon. That signifies that when you create a toggle state, it has already been wired up. If you go to the prototype tab, you see that it's already wired up. So let's test this out. Perfect. So this was quick. So there you have it, a radio button, but do stick along till the end of the tutorial because I'm going to show you a better animated way to make a radio button. Alright, so next we're going to look at checkboxes. So let's move ahead. Okay, so I have created a new artboard. We're going to begin with a rectangle. So I'm quickly going to create a rectangle and center it along. I'm just going to give it a corner radius. We are only interested in the border, so I'm going to deselect the fill, change the color for the border, and now I'm going to select a different color. Let's go with this blue. Again, I'm going to set the border width to 2 or maybe even 3. So I'm going to zoom out, and I need a check mark or a tick mark for the checkbox. So I already added it over here. Now you can basically just move it or create a copy by Command or Control C and paste it where you need it. Or you could press the Alt or Options key and then just drag the item to where you want, and it will automatically create a copy. So that's a quick tip to basically work faster. So I'm going to resize this, and again, if you want to resize it about the center, press Alt, and then if you want to preserve your proportions, press Shift and then resize. Now when I resized, the border width actually is too much for what I want, so I'm going to reset the border width to 3, and I'm going to set the color of this tick mark to white. You'll know why in a second. So let's select both of the items, and from the properties inspector I'm going to actually just align both to the center using these settings. So you cannot see this yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both again, and as we did for the radio button, we are going to make this into a component. So this is the default state. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to rename this to checkbox, and again, this is what we need for the default state or the unchecked state. So I'm going to create a toggle state, and you see this flash or lightning icon over here. So it's going to be wired up automatically by Adobe. For the check state, what I want is for this rectangle to be filled completely. So this is the default state, this is the check state. So I'm going to zoom out, and let's play this. So this is playing according to the default wiring made by Adobe XD. So if you're not happy with this, you can actually go to the prototype tab and edit the animations. So I'm just going to set this to 0.4 seconds again for the check state as well, to come back to the default state. So I'm happy with these. Now let's see. It's not much of a difference, but you know the drill. Again, like the radio buttons, do stick around till the end of the video, because I'm going to show a nice and smooth way to animate the checkbox as well. So that's it for the checkbox. Next, we are going to look at making the toggle switches. To make those toggle switches, I'm going to begin with a rectangle, but the important thing is the corner radii. So I'm going to set this to a really high value, maybe 50. So it's going to look like this. Now we want the fill, so I'm going to deselect the border, and I want to set the fill color to like a lighter gray. Again, I'm just selecting randomly from this palette. You can choose your colors in your designs. Quickly center it, and now we need a few ellipses. So I'm pressing the shift key to basically make it into a circle, and if I don't press the shift key, you see it's not a perfect circle because it's an ellipse. So if you press the shift key while you're resizing it, it will make it into a circle. So now let's come in over here and resize to a size that I'm happy with. Okay, so for this ellipse, again, we don't want the border, so I'm going to deselect the border. For the fill color, I'm going to choose this one. Again, these are random. So that's the ellipse, but now I'm designing the off state. So I don't want this ellipse or circle to be a pink color or any accent color that you're using in your design. I want it to be gray. So it indicates whatever setting whatever toggle setting this is, it's off. But what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to duplicate this circle by pressing Command or Control D. And now I'm going to set the color for the second ellipse to the accent color that I want. But I'm going to reduce the opacity. Instead of hiding it, I'm going to reduce the opacity to 0. So when we turn this setting on, that circle is going to be visible. So again, just like before, I'm going to select all these 3 layers and come over here in the properties inspector to make a component. Now this is the default state. I'm happy with what it looks like. So again, I'm going to create a new state. So using a toggle state is basically the perfect use case for a toggle switch. First, I'm going to rename this. And for the toggle state, which is the on state, what I want is for the accent color circle to be completely visible, but the off state gray color circle, which is behind this pink color, to be invisible. So I set the opacity to 0. But again, I'm going to move these to the other side. There you have it. But unlike the previous radio buttons and checkbox that we designed, I'm going to come over here in the properties tab and edit the interaction. So I want this to be an auto animation, but I'm going to select the easing to snap and the duration to 0.6. So I'm going to do the same thing for the other state as well. So let's quickly test this. So you see, by setting the easing to snap, it's actually going past the 100% mark and then coming back. So there you have it, a toggle switch that you can use as a component in your designs. Next, we are going to be designing a few buttons. So let's get started. I'm going to use a rectangle. Now you can use any size you want according to the design that you're making. I'm happy with this one, but I'm just going to round these corners to about 16 or where I'm happy with. Quickly, I'm going to center this out. Awesome. So now we have fill and border both selected. So I'm going to deselect border for this one. I am going to use a bright orange color just to use a different color this time. Next, I'm going to copy this. So again, pressing Alt and then just dragging it out. And now in the layers panel, I'm going to bring this forward, setting the color to white so it's visible. I'm going to set the size to 32 and again center this. So this might be a submit button that you're using in a form. So what I want to do is when the user hovers over the button, I want to basically indicate that the user has hovered over the button by making a subtle change. So one change that I can think of is to basically change the fill and for this rectangle and convert it into just a border. So what I'm going to do is again duplicate this rectangle by pressing Command or Control D, and I'm going to set for the rectangle on the top, I'm going to deselect the fill and have a border. The reason I'm making 2 copies of these rectangles are because for the one where we have the fill selected, I want a drop shadow, like a subtle drop shadow. And for the drop shadow, I'm going to select the same color as the button and then just adjust the opacity to where I'm happy with. I'm going to select again, just like before, select all the 3 layers, make it into a component, and this is what the default state looks like. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to create one more state, but this time I'm going to create a hover state, renaming the component and going in. This is the rectangle with the border, so that's what I want to show. And this is the rectangle with the fill and the drop shadow. So when I hover over it, the button should basically float even further out. So I'm going to just remove the shadow by just setting the opacity to 0 so it's not visible. And since the text or the submit button is white in color, I'm going to set another color, so I could use the accent color. So this is what it looks like. Let's test it out quickly. So you see the shadow is basically going away when I hover over it, so it appears as if the button is coming closer to the cursor or the mouse. So that's one way. It's a pretty professional or a standard way to design buttons. Before moving forward, I want to indicate, like, if you are basically designing an app or a website, and if you want the button to actually do something or take you to another artboard, instead of directly wiring the default state to like another artboard, it's a better idea to actually wire the hover state, which takes you to the next artboard or the intended function of the button. The reason being, when you first interact with the button, the first interaction is the hover and not the default state. So when you hover over it, you want to wire the hover state to the next artboard. So there you have it. That's like one professional or like a simple way to design buttons. Right over here, we're going to actually do like another a bit casual like design as well. So again, starting off with a rectangle, I'm going to round the corners again, and this time I'm going to get rid of the border, set a color so it looks like this again. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it out, arrange them together so I can select all the layers and align them vertically and horizontally in the center. So in this casual button design, what I'm going to do is basically create an effect where a few designs are actually popping out of the button. I'm bad at expressing verbally, so let's get down to it. I'm going to duplicate this rectangle by pressing Command or Control D. And now I'm going to rename the top layer or the top rectangle to top. And this is 1. And I'm going to create one more copy. Set the bottom layer to 2, just so I know which is which. Because for the layer named 1, I'm going to change the color to like a darker one. And to see that, I need to hide the top layer first. So this is the color for that. And I'm going to choose like a darker shade of the same color. And to see the layer 2, again I'm going to select like a more darker shade of the same color. So I'm just going to basically stay in the same hue, just reduce the saturation. Awesome. So now we have all the 4 layers. So I'm going to select all the 4 again quickly, make a component. So this is what I want it to look like in the default state. So quickly add one more state, again creating a hover state over here. What I want for the bottom 2 rectangles is to show up slightly from the bottom right. So you can move these layers by pressing the right arrow key, but a quicker way is to press shift and then move 10 pixels at a time. So this is the default state and this is the hover state. Let's test this out. Okay, maybe I can get a bit more crazy. So I'm going to get in over here, select the text box, and then increase the size. Again, I'm going to center this, and let's test it again. So there you go. This is a more subtle and like a professional button, and this is a bit casual and crazy. So there you have it, two different ways to design a button. Next, we are going to look at creating an input box or a text box. So I want to recreate the text box that Google uses. I'm not too sure if you are aware or if you've looked that closely, but they use the material angular design, and so that's what I'm gonna try to recreate. So I'm using this rectangle. I'm going to round the corners. So this is the bounding boxes for the input field, if you may, and I'm going to create a copy or basically like a placeholder, just setting the border the way I like it. Okay, so coming back, so the way Google uses it is basically when you click on the input field to enter some characters, this label or placeholder actually moves to the top over here. Not too sure if you've noticed, but let's try to recreate that. So I want to create three states for this input field. One is the default state, which you can see over here. The other one is a hover state, just to indicate a subtle difference on hover. And the third state is an in focus state. So when the user actually clicks on the text field and it's about to enter some stuff, you can use and create different states like any error state or out of focus state, or even customize it to like a password state. Okay, so let's do a password state. So I'm going to rename this to password. Okay, but I'm going to also add one more rectangle just about the size of this label. I'm going to set it beneath that. Now the reason I'm doing this is going to be clear just in a moment, so just stick with me. I'm going to deselect the border and have a white fill or any background color that you're using for the artboard. So there you go. I'm going to group them and name it label. Okay, so for the password field we have the placeholder, and also for the hover state I want to basically have something in the bottom, so I'm just going to create a rectangle and shape. So I'm just going to duplicate this, resize it to about 8 pixels, set the fill this time. Now I'm going to actually customize the radius for each corner. I want this to be 0. I want the other one to be 0 as well, and I just want the two bottom corner radii to match whatever we use, so it looks like this. Now since it's a password field, I also want to use an eye icon, so I'm going to use the icon that I already have over here, bring it in to where I want to use it, and again align it according to my styles or any preference you might have. This is too big for what I want, so I'm going to set the height proportionately. and I'm happy where it is now. Only thing is I want to set the color. Okay, so we have all the fields that I need. So I'm going to, again, like before, select everything, create a component. So for the default state, I don't want to show the bottom rectangle, so I'm resizing it by pressing Alt so that it sets or changes according from both the sides. I want it to be 0, and I'm also going to set the opacity to 0 so it's not visible. And again, for the default state, we don't want this eye to show up, so I'm going to set that as well. So that's all I want to show for the default state. Now let's go ahead and create a hover state. So for the hover state, I'm going to come in over here and just show that rectangle, that line. So I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to resize them back to where or how they were. So that's what I want to show for the hover state. Perfect. Now going back to the default state, I'm going to create a new state from here, name it to in focus. So when this password field is in focus, again, I want this field to show up. So I'm going to resize it. Perfect. I also want the eye icon to show up. Perfect. But now, like Google uses it in their material angular design, the label actually moves over here. And now you can see why I use that rectangle beneath the label. So part of this rectangle is actually hidden behind that. Perfect. Now you can actually go ahead and also display a cursor. Let's play this. So there you go. I'm going to hover. Okay, so that looks good. Now I'm going to basically go to the prototype tab, and like I mentioned before, set the interactions from the hover state. So I'm going to create an interaction. I want it to be a tap trigger and auto animate. And if you're using a new version of Adobe XD, you can basically set the destination to the states for the component. So I want to go to the in focus. I'm going to use ease in and out and a good 0.6 seconds duration. Perfect. So now you can actually create more interactions from here as well, like an error state. So you can show the interactions from the in focus state. I'm going to just show the 3 states. So there you go. That's a sweet animation. And when I click on it, the password label moves to the top, but I also want to actually reduce the size of that. So I'm going to select the in focus state and select the label and basically just resize it. So there you go. That's a nice hover state. You can actually add one more state where the user clicks on the eye icon so they can see the password or not see the password. So that's a good tip as well. So there you go. That's a nice and quick design for a text box. I'm going to save the progress. That's important. And as promised before, I'm going to show you one more way to animate radio buttons and a checkbox. So I'm going to create a new artboard and quickly create an ellipse. We want to use the border for this one and deselect the fill. Okay, now I'm going to use a nice and bright color for this. You can use any color you want. I'm going to quickly duplicate this layer as we did earlier, and I'm going to resize this to where I'm happy with. We're going to deselect the border and set the fill to the same color. Again, just like before, select both the layers, create a component, which is the default state. But in the default state, I don't want to see the inner circle. So I'm going to set the opacity to 0. Perfect. Now I'm going to quickly create a copy of this artboard by pressing Command or Control D. Coming back to this component over here, I'm going to basically create like one more state. So, or maybe we don't use state components for this one. So I'm going to right click over here, ungroup component. Okay, but I do want to actually have it as a group. So I'm going to select all the layers over here and name it as radio button, if I can spell it correctly. Again, I'm going to name this to the exact same name as before for auto animate to actually show the changes. So I'm going to quickly come in over here and I'm going to set the opacity to 100%. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is what I want the final state to be. So the radio button is going to be going to animate from here to here. Perfect. Now create a copy of this artboard again, like so. And then what I want is again to set the opacity to 100%, but now I'm going to actually resize this to be even bigger than the outer circle. So this is only going to be like an intermediate state for the animation. This is not a final state. So we have these three artboards. Now quickly move to the prototype tab. When the user clicks on this state, we actually want to go to the intermediate artboard. So this trigger is going to be a trap trigger, obviously an auto animate interaction. I want the easing to be ease in, the duration to be 0.4, but from this artboard, actually I'm not selecting the group, I'm going to select the artboard itself because this animation or interaction is going to be a timed interaction with a delay of 0 and the easing to ease out. Set the time to 0.2, so the total duration is 0.6. Okay, I'm going to set this as a home state, but again, what if I want to basically deselect the radio button? So here's the problem. I cannot just go back to the intermediate screen because we already have an interaction from this artboard to this artboard. So to get around this, what I'm going to do is basically create a copy of this artboard, the intermediate artboard. So I'm going to go back to the design tab, create a copy, and now we can use the duplicate as an intermediate state. So going back into the prototype tab, we are going to create an interaction which is going to be a tap interaction. And let me just see what this easing was. So it's ease in. So I'm going to keep it as ease in, or basically we are reversing the interaction. So I'm going to keep the same easing as this one. So we're going to keep as ease out and duration is 0.2. So now over here I can add a timed interaction with a delay of 0 and easing to be ease in and duration to be 0.4. So now let's save the progress first and play this. So the second interaction is not quite the same or the reverse of the first one. So I'm going to come back over here, set the ease or just change the easing because I'm sure that's going to solve that. Save the progress and preview the interaction. There you go. That's one way to make a more casual radio button interaction. So again, as promised earlier, I'm going to also show you a nice way to make a checkbox. So let's go to the design tab and create one more artboard over here. For the checkbox, I'm going to create a rectangle, and by pressing shift you can basically create a square, or you can come back in over here and set the width and height to be the same. I'm going to center it. We only want the border, so I'm going to set a border to where I like it, and we obviously want rounded corners. We use a different color, or maybe use the same one for now. Okay, so now I'm going to bring back the check mark, but this is what's interesting. So we saw like a professional or like the normal or regular way to animate a checkbox. But now I want to get a bit creative, and so I'm going to basically set the check mark, and I'm going to get out of the bounds of the square. So here's what I mean. To adjust the border size, and I want this check mark to actually go outside this boundary, as if we were doing it with a pen on a paper. That's what I want to simulate. So zooming in over here, obviously the default state is where this is unchecked. So how do we solve that? One good way is to use masks. So I'm going to basically just duplicate this rectangle, resize the rectangle. Now this does not matter at all like what color you use, because this is going to be a mask. So I'm going to set, or actually like not have fill or border for these for the mask. So I'm going to select the mask rectangle and the tick mark, and right click and select this option, mask with shape. Maybe I need to place the rectangle on top. Okay, yeah, there you go. So by adjusting this rectangle, we are going to animate the checkbox. So right now in the default state, I don't want the tick mark to show at all. So this is what you see. Again, selecting this, creating a component. So this is what my default state should look like. So that's good. Press on the plus icon over here to create a toggle state, which is the check state. So all I'm going to change is the size of that mask to show the tick mark, but I also want to change the color of this one. So, or you can set the color to be black if you like it like that. So we're simulating as if you were actually checking it on a piece of paper. So with a black pen, so that's good as well, right? So there you go. This is the default state, and this is the toggle state. Perfect. So now let's go to the prototype tab, and I don't want to use the default easing. I'm going to use ease in and out, and 0.4 as the duration. So again, setting those over here as well. There you go. Let's play this. This is much better. Okay, so there you have it. The input field animations and 2 extra ways to make radio buttons and checkboxes. I'm new to YouTube, and I like sharing my knowledge and skills with the community. So if you like what you see, please consider subscribing and share this video with someone you think would benefit from this tutorial. Feel free to actually comment down below with a link to your designs. I'd love to see what you create. Or we also have an Instagram account where you can actually just directly message us. if you have any questions or suggestions. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.